Production and scarcity are very closely related. So you cannot have something in terms of an easy factor. The government of India had spent billions of rupees in terms of making India a modernized nation. India had at one point of time about 40% of its land, or even more than that, under the forest region. Good morning and welcome to the first session in Unit 2, Chapter 2 for the second semester in BCom Sustainable Development, where we are going to speak about the economic theory of depletable resources. Now, what is the economic theory here all about? Why is it so important? Why? Because the human economy depends on a greater purpose towards the use of resources. Now, for many a purpose that we are going to talk about today, without the natural resources that are available, it is not possible for the human beings to run a normal life, to continue doing some production activities, neither to take forward in terms of business and development. So when we talk about a resource can be defined as a stock of primary material or as a flow of primary energy suitable as an input. Now let me make it very simple here. Now whenever you talk about a resource, it could be anything that we are talking about. Let it be a wood, or let it be sand, or let it be some plastic. Whatever we are talking about is a material that's a primary source for production. So now what happens is that as the stock depletes, the production will come to an end. And as the stock increases, we would again try to recycle it back into the production zone altogether. Now, it has to be realized that in this definition, resources have the meaning in combination within human knowledge, culture, and skills related to that specific domain or to that specific resource. Now, when I talk about a specific resource, like let's say steel, iron, or if you're going to talk about coal, or whichever kind of resource you're going to talk about, it has a combination of the human ideology, human skill set, then followed by culture, followed by the skill sets that are required to convert that particular input as a materialistic output. So what we need to worry about is that how to convert knowledge, culture, and skills put together. So always keep in mind, it's about the knowledge, culture, and skills. This triangle one has to understand very clearly, because using the knowledge and the skills combined with the culture is going to be the output that is being defined in terms of your economic theory. Followed by, for an economist, now the physical distinctions of resources are useful but not sufficient. Why? Indeed, the central question of an economist is whether the resource is scarce or not. Now, for a production and that of an economist, there are two things that one has to understand. Point number one is that economist is more from a long-term visionary standpoint. Production is more from a short-term standpoint. Secondly, production is more about a technical activity when I talk about an engineer, about a company. But for an economist, it's about the availability of the resource itself. So suppose the resource is scarce. That means that resource cannot be depleted very fast. You can't keep on utilizing that resource. You cannot just keep on making use in terms of right, center, left. But then you need to understand how the resource has to be judiciously used. Followed by, if the resource is scarce, rent must be paid for the use of it. Secondly, the resource is super abundant. Now, we are going to talk about an extreme scenario here when in economic sense, the resource can be considered to be available and it is implied that there is no rent need to be paid. Now, for example, when I talk about the mining metallurgy scenario or the sector altogether, the mining metallurgy is a very reserved sector. It is a scarce resource. So the rent that is involved in terms of utilizing that resource is very high. It is something which is way beyond that we are talking about. But when I'm going to talk about the factor of when the resource is available in plenty, now let's say, for example, we're going to talk about something like the nanotechnology, or we're going to talk about something which is available in the abundance factors altogether. Let's say an e-commerce tool, or we're going to talk about a service platform altogether. That means there's no rent that needs to be paid. The availability is easier, so we can convert it and we can take it forward. So what does the economic theory say is that whether the resource is scarce or not, that's what we have to judge as an economist. Followed by, just have a look into the question here, the scarcity of resource. The physical distinction, though it is not, but then when I come back to this factor, why do I again go back in terms of making you understand is that the scarcity factor, production and scarcity are very, very closely related. So you cannot have something in terms of an easy factor. Moment in economics, we try to make you understand about it, that physical distinction, what comes into the mind of the economist, we again and again reiterate that factor. Why? Because as resources start getting into the scarcity zone, automatically for an economist, that particular resource becomes an interesting area of study. So that's why we talk more about the scarcity of resources. Followed by the history of humanity. What I'm going to talk about here is that this is quite a distinctive subject. You just have to think a little bit out of the box altogether. Now, in the 70s and 80s, we are talking about the time of 1970s and 1980s, there were two severe oil crises that shocked the world economy. On the top of that, this was expected because of the growing world population in near future, and the world economy would have rather taken it very, very robustly, very actively at that point of time. This very, very clearly implies that the humanity will run out of depletable resources and you need to find something alternative in nature. So what we are trying to define here is the human economy relation and the depletable resources altogether. Though the world and the history has taught us many a times about the depletion of resources, it's not only about oil, it's also about water, it's also about land, soil, vegetation, agriculture, so many other factors. But what has been the central idea of any country or any economy, if I have to talk about, is continue to focus on production. What every economy in the world has believed that unless and until you produce and export, you will not be able to go further. So which means to say that the human economy is directly related to the depletable resources. Why? Because human economy tends to keep on producing more and more. They want more. They want to produce. They want to keep on increasing the output. So when you keep on increasing the output, the resources will not be available to you at the same rate. So at some point of time, the depletion of the resources is directly linked to the human needs and want. So as the population will keep on increasing, at one fine point, at one fine morning, you will be coming and asking this question, where did the resource go? The resource went because we did not take an alternative step or measure to restore it back. So that's why I say that the human theory, the human economy is very, very closely linked to that of this depletion theory. Followed by a research question which I would like to take you through is that the main question to be asked in this chapter is how to escape from a new scarcity and to make clear possible instrument to exist a government to attain its particular goal. Now let's take the Indian government itself. The government of India had spent billions of rupees in terms of making India a modernized nation. Now, we got this idea only in the year 1991-92 onwards when we started practicing the concept of LPG, that is none other than liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Over a period of time, in the last 20-30 years, what we have been able to do is that we have been able to transform India into a modernized nation with a better infrastructure facility, trying to project India as a manufacturing hub, as a services hub, as a well-developed, knowledgeable economy altogether. But then, what the government has not taken into account is the sustainability part. Many parts of India are not able to sustain. They are just running out of resources, or probably people are migrating to different places because of the survival factor. So in order to find the possible answers for this question, a survey of the economic and the related literature has been made. Now, if you will look into it, you will be able to understand that many parts of India are still underdeveloped because they have not understood about the sustainability. Somewhere they have understood about survival, but survival and sustainability are not the same. Survival is only a process by which you will think to innovate yourself, to do something better, to do something to make others or to make an activity happen. You will try to think of how to live for tomorrow. That's exactly where survival comes into picture. But sustainability is not about just tomorrow. Sustainability is not just about thinking how to live. It is more about how to exist together in this environment. So when you talk about a human theory and when you talk about a factor like the sustainability here, there is always a research question mark that comes into picture. How am I going to take it forward? How am I going to make the system more conducive enough for a longer existence? Followed by the special emphasis has been laid on the possibilities of substitution between resources and technical innovation as possible solutions to the question, as well as upon the role time preference comes into picture. Now, this is quite interesting for all of us to understand. Why? Because the latter part of the concept is very, very crucial. Why? We are trying to pursue something which is on the higher order of thinking. That's what we are actually trying to do. Why? Because unless and until you understand the usage value of a resource, you will not be able to understand the sustainable growth. Now, let me make this concept very simple for you. Now, we all know that India had at one point of time about 40% of its land, or even more than that, under the forest region. But slowly we started depleting those forest area because of the urban civilization growth. Now, what is happening is that when man wants to go back and find greenery, today he is finding it difficult to go back and recreate a forest, recreate that era of greenery altogether. The reason is that it's not just because he has cut down the trees. The reason here is that he did not understand the sustainability. He just saw the factor of survival. So wherever he got a space, wherever he got to move, he started making use of the land and the resources that were available. Now, when he is being asked to give back to the nature, when he is being asked to recreate the same thing that was 50, 60 years back, we find it difficult. Why? Because we have not understood the true value of resource. We saw that resource only as a material, as an object that could be probably used for a timely purpose for some development. But today, when you have to rebuild, recreate, or bring back that situation, the question mark still remains on your mind. How am I going to do it? So that's what we are trying to research here as a question. Now, the next thing is the production factor. The most interesting topic in economics is definitely production, because all of us know that production is all about the price and quantity. Now, that's what we have been studying in economics altogether. But here, for a change, we're going to study production factor. Nature plays an important part of the economic process and in the economic science. Why we say this is that relation between economics and ecology is an important issue. The fight is always between economics and environment. Please understand that factor very clearly. We are fighting. We are fighting in the sense it is without weapons, it is without any kind of technology, it is without any kind of noise. But the fight has been on for many generations. The noise is now getting created because many of us are now being asked this question: will you be able to make your future generations survive on this Mother Earth planet? Now, that's where the question is coming in. Why? Because one side, the environmentalists are questioning the economists. In the name of growth, you have destroyed, you have shortened the lifespan of this planet Earth. The other side, the economists come back and charge, and they say that No, we have not actually shortened the lifespan, but we have brought in alternative methods to increase production, to make the world more productive, to make the nation more stronger in terms of employment, in terms of growth, in terms of revenue and other services. Now, the debate that is still lying, that is still unanswered or probably not given the judgment altogether is that should I just support the environmentalists or should I go with the economist view? So that's where we are trying to find out a mediator. We are trying to find a balance. We're going to strike a balance there and find out which side we really need to stick on so that we have the concern for environment and economics together. Followed by the non-renewable resources, which most of us know, but then we're going to look into the ideology of Schumacher, who had actually told because it's a money-directed thinking and it seems that it does not matter whether or not a product is produced at the expense of the use of large quantities of non-renewable resources. At the end of the day, economics probably taught all of us how to make money. And no doubt about it, that's the most wonderful question that everybody would like to ask and everybody would seek an answer for it. But what has happened here is that in the race for money, we lost our mind. We lost the mindset towards the environment because we have not understood still that the resources, especially the non-renewable resources, are scarce in nature. So what are we exactly going to do to refill that? Now, we don't have an answer for that. Why? Because the future is all about scarcity. The future is not an unlimited version altogether. Now, what we had as an answer, a convenient answer rather, I would like to say, is that we used to shift the methodology of production by adopting various technology. Now, at some point of time when people were chopping down the trees for the sake of paper, today we have gone paperless, we have gone digital. But then, by just stopping down on cutting off trees, that doesn't mean that we have actually grown on the environmental concern. On the other hand, we have started depleting the silicon metal altogether because of heavy stress coming on the semiconductor chips. And we have been able to create an e-pollution on this earth. Now, recycling of those gadgets, everything is now coming under question mark. So somewhere down the lane, the future of scarcity is still not being explained. So that's what Schumacher says, that being money directed, we just went forward, depleted all the resources, and we were never ever satisfied with the amount of money that was made by using this non-renewable resources. Now let's come back to the father of economics, Adam Smith, who had actually said that as soon as the land of any country has become a private property. Now look at that statement. The landlords, like other men, love to reap where they have sowed and they demand a rent for its natural products. What happened after the human economic freedom? Please understand that word very clearly, human economic freedom. When I try to say that, that means to say when people came out in terms of understanding, in terms of owning up the property, in terms of owning up the resources on this earth, automatically it became a race, it became a competition of survival. Now, what used to happen is that people started owning the properties in terms of land, in terms of water, in terms of mining, in terms of oil, petroleum, all those factors, and they understood that you can make money out of it on a rental basis. Now, similarly, the wood of the forest, the grass of the field, and all the natural fruits of the earth, which was actually common to all. Now, that statement is a very, very important thing. It was common to all. During the time of outbreak of civilization on this planet Earth, nobody's intention was to make the property private. But today the intention is that it is purely private. So the cost of enjoying these resources has become costlier. For a common man to today to go to an island or to a resort or to a greenery or a forest or whichever place, it's again owned by governmental or private property owners, where you have to pay a rent, where you have to pay a usage charge in order to enjoy the fruits of Mother Nature. So now what happens is that the additional price that's fixed upon them, that's definitely going to hike up and it is going to play a huge amount of price to them. Followed by they must, the licensing factor that starts coming inside, they have to pay for it. And of course, the profit sharing ratios also comes into picture. Now, the next thing that we are going to talk about is the renewable resources, which can be maintained at an optimum level if harvesting is restricted by the market or by the regulation. However, fossil fuels are a different matter altogether. Now, what are we talking about here is that renewable resources can be maintained at an optimum level if harvesting is restricted in the market. That means now we are going to try to bring in the regulation factor inside. Now, this regulation factor is going to be a question mark. Why? Because now if you're going to bring in a regulation factor, automatically the rules and regulations will become tighter in terms of use. The factor of control comes into picture, but nevertheless, that does not apply to the fossil fuels. The use of fossil fuels leads to a reduction of total stock, which cannot be replenished. So I'm not going to go towards that fossil fuel because that's a non-renewable resource that has a different level, different restriction altogether. But when we talk about the renewable itself, how are we going to control it? How are we going to make the best use of it is going to be the futuristic question. Now, the other factor is that in this case, the optimum exploitation means that the use should be spread over a time efficiently as possible. So I'm going to bring in the factor called as time here. Time versus resources. This matters a lot for all of us. And indeed, this does not mean that the scarcity of resource can increase. That means to say that now this will not give me a guarantee that I will overcome the scarcity. The scarcity will completely go away from me. No, that doesn't mean said here at all. What it means here is that you are only delaying the process. You are only going to delay the depletion of the resources altogether. You're not going to deny it completely. So what we are trying to do here is that let's take some more time in terms of depleting the resources. So I'm going to bring in the time factor, which is going to be very, very important, followed by the environment itself. Now, I'm going to come back to the environment. Why? Because if the nature is left undisturbed, a climax stage will develop on Earth, subjected to natural circumstances like temperature or like rainfall. The climax stage will differ regionally. Sometimes it appears possible for man to fit into such a system. Now, what is happening here is that the environment is so important for us. We try to get on to a situation where we don't want to disturb the environment at all. Now, there are many areas or parts of this world where man has not yet explored. He has just left it to the nature. Now, those parts are being still unexplored. Why? Because we haven't shown interest of development in those areas. So those areas have a natural pattern in terms of the climatic conditions, and that's how it has been there for several years. Now, if man gets into that system as a part of the entire ecosystem, as an organism into that ecosystem, he will be able to fit into the system because he doesn't have much of rights to question or try to explore or understand how it happens. He has to just follow the process that has been going on there for several years. Now, the next thing is that there are examples of tribes who are still able to support themselves by hunting and gathering food. No doubts about it. If you go to Andaman Nicobar Islands in India, the Union Territory factor, definitely you will be able to see that there are still tribes available who continue to survive by hunting and gathering of food. Now, these communities know what their ecosystem means to them. That means to say that they know the importance there very, very clearly by keeping their population limited, very important, and they have kept their natural customs intact, which means they are not harming the environment. They're not going to create any trouble to the ecosystem in the name of development. They probably have lived underdeveloped according to us, but according to them, they don't want to disturb the system. They want to remain as what they are. Now, that's where the question of human economic development comes into picture. But the other side, the environmentalists will definitely support this because these people are not creating any problem to the ecosystem. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the resources that have been displayed, that have been shown through this particular presentation will be of great resource to you, both in terms of theory as well as in terms of the practical. Now, in the upcoming sessions, we will be talking more about the different factors of environmental economics and sustainability. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.